I just want to share two dreams that I had recently that I think will give insight to a number of people. I probably had this dream close to a month ago now, maybe three to 4 weeks. Around this time, the idea of getting a part-time job popped into my head. It was just kind of like, okay, supplemental income. I can still do what I've been doing on YouTube and business wise, the consultations and all of that. I can still do that and just do something part time to supplement my income. Now, I wasn't thinking about this deeply. It's just something that popped into my head, thought about it and kept going. I mean, I didn't start job hunting or anything like that. And then I had a dream. And in this dream, I received a job offer in the mail. Kind of old school. They sent me a letter. And in the dream, I knew that this job offer was coming from the time that I actually was last looking for a job, which would be like August, September of 2023. So here I am getting an offer from that time period a year and a half later. Kind of odd. And the offer was from like an attorney's office, right? For a position, an administrative position. And I opened the letter and I could see like the pay that they were offering. Instead of per hour, it was like per 20 minutes. It was a weird breakdown. But what I gathered from it was that the pay was good, but I wouldn't be working a lot of hours. So essentially part time. And without going into too many details, the dream ended with me considering the job. I didn't have like conviction or confirmation that I was accepting the job in the dream or anything. It was just kind of like I was thinking about it. I was optimistic about it. It seemed like a decent opportunity, but the dream ended before I made any type of decision. And so I woke up from that dream and I'm thinking about it. I'm meditating on it. I knew it was a spiritual dream. It wasn't just my flesh or something like that. And I'm like, what does this mean, God? I asked God for more revelation. Like, what are you saying? Obviously I knew that the thought of getting a job had crossed my mind. So I'm like, okay, is this you saying, yeah, go ahead and do that? The very next night, I had another dream. And it was a follow on dream because now I was back at work. I was back in the regular workforce. And it's funny because I was working at my first job. I didn't travel back in time and, was my high school self. It was current day, but where I was working was my very first job, which was a grocery store. And I knew it was like my first shift back. And so I'm working and then I finish my shift. I go to clock out, but something had happened. Maybe I got sidetracked or whatever. And I couldn't remember if I had already clocked out or not. So I'm like, okay, let me go back to the clock. Let me clock out and see what happens. So I'm assuming the way it works is the clock, you enter your employee number and then the clock in, clock out button is the same button. So if you're already clocked in, it'll clock you out. If you're already clocked out, it'll clock you in, that kind of thing. So I go back to the clock and I go to clock out. I enter my employee number, but it clocks me in. So I was like, oh, okay, I must have already clocked out. As soon as that happened, the manager came on the intercom and he asked to see two people back in the office. He asked to see some random person and myself. He was like, this person and Marcus, can you come to the office? And the office is right behind the clock. So I just turn around and knock on the door. He was surprised to see me that quickly. He calls me and this other guy into the office and he's addressing us one by one. So he's addressing the other guy first. And essentially, he's like interrogating him. I don't know if some money came up missing in the store or something like that, but he's questioning him in that way. And so I can only assume I'm there for the same reason. And once it's my turn, he's going to ask me the same questions. But I'm just standing to the side and waiting and waiting and waiting to the point where, like, I just kind of step out of the office because I'm just waiting there and I start walking around the store and I'm kind of annoyed because it's like I've already finished my shift. I've worked a full shift, a full 8-hour shift, and I'm just standing around waiting now. And so eventually I make my way back around to the office and the manager is coming out of the office as I'm walking back there. So we meet eyes and I'm expecting him to finally address me, you know, and he's just like, "What?" And I'm like, "What do you mean what? I'm ready to go home. I finished my shift. It's nighttime now. I'm ready to go home." And his response was essentially, "You're here for as long as I want you here. You're here for as long as I schedule you." And I'm like, "Yeah, but I worked my scheduled shift." And I start to walk back to the office and continue to wait. But then I stop myself and I say, "You know what? Forget that." And I walk out and the dream ends. So here's what I think the Lord was saying between the two dreams. The first dream was essentially, yeah, you can get a part-time job and sure, all those things that you were thinking about may be true. Supplemental income, which will be a benefit. You can continue doing what you've been doing, although probably not spend as much time with it while also earning a more steady income, this, that, and the other. But in the second dream, it's like, understand what you're going back into. You're going back into that system of slavery to some extent, right? Not having control of your time. As the guy was telling me, as the manager was telling me, you're here for as long as I want you here. you know, you're going back into that system that I've delivered you from. Because the only reason I'm not in the regular workforce is because God pulled me out of it. God said, "You invest your money in what I tell you to, you won't have to work a regular job again." And that has been true. Don't get me wrong, it hasn't been without its struggles, but I've always had a roof over my head. I've always had a place to sleep, food to eat, right? He's sustained me. And obviously, thank you all for your support. But he was essentially saying, of course, the choice is yours, as most things in life, but understand what you'd be going back into. It's kind of like the Israelites when they were delivered from Egypt, from that slavery, and they were in that wilderness, and it was a little uncomfortable. It was unfamiliar. They had to learn a new way of life. They wanted to go back into slavery. They literally wanted to go back to Egypt, where they were being enslaved and given a crazy workload that they couldn't really sustain and all sorts of stuff. In a way, those of us who have been pulled out of the regular workforce by God, we face that same temptation. Oh, it's more comfortable, a more stable income, this, that, and the other. Let me just go get another job. Let me just go, even me, part-time. I'm not even saying full-time, part-time, but even then, you're going back into that system. So I just want to encourage anyone who is in that same situation, as a couple of you have said you are, ask the Lord about it, ask the Lord about it, because there's a lot of truth to what I just said about going back into that system that He's delivered you from. Yes, it may be uncomfortable, but we know what we're on a path to. We're on the path to our promised land. So the discomfort is just in the transition. It will get better. It will get better. If you can hold on, I encourage you to hold on, as I am holding on. Once I had those two dreams, I did not revisit the idea of getting a part-time job. The book I've been reading or listening to, The Psychology of Money, I like the way that he defines wealth in the book. He says wealth is being able to do what you want when you want for as long as you want. That's what wealth is. So he doesn't even directly tie it to money, although obviously being wealthy monetarily opens up your time. But he ties it directly to time. He ties it directly to having freedom over your time. That's what wealth is. So, in a sense, those of us who God has delivered from the regular workforce have already received a sort of wealth transfer. Just think back to when your schedule was dictated to you by your job and how many mornings you woke up frustrated, not wanting to go. how many mornings and days you wanted to do something else. And now you're able to. Obviously, now you got to manage your time and schedule time to be productive on your own and earn an income on your own if you're an entrepreneur like myself. But at least that's your time. You're managing it, you're dictating it. You have control of it. Another book I read recently, The Richest Man in Babylon. You may hear that and have like a knee jerk reaction like, oh my gosh, Babylon, isn't that evil? Okay, so I'm reading the book and I'm listening to the wisdom in it, the principles, right? Chew the meat, spit out the bones kind of thing. And the book is solid. There's just one section where they talk about the goddess of prosperity or something like that, where obviously I'm not feeding on that, but the principles that the book puts forth is very solid. And if you listen to anybody talk about managing money, a lot of times the principles that they're giving you are from this book. This is like a classic book. But there's a whole section of that book is on slavery versus freedom, being a slave versus being a free man. And it's funny because when the central character in the book was a slave, he was receiving a wage, right? So when I say slavery, it doesn't have to be as drastic as what we saw in America. It could just be working for someone else, not having control of your time, that person dictating what you're doing with your time. And he was asked the question, do you have the spirit of a slave or the spirit of a free man? And essentially, you'll operate differently and act differently depending on which one you have. Even if you're not wealthy at the time, if you have the spirit of a free man, you will act in a way that will eventually bring in that wealth. And so there's a strong theme when it comes to this whole thing and the wealth transfer of slavery versus freedom.